Table topics theme for today is moving forward with a mastermind. You know, in life, we all encounter obstacles, how they impact our lives to some point or another. Some allow these obstacles to hold us back from achieving all that we're here to do, all that we're here to become. Others use these obstacles as motivators to help propel themselves to greater realizations in their life. Charles, I'd like to ask you this question and give us feedback for 1 to 2 minutes, please. What bump in the road helped you to see or come to the conclusion that there was something else out there worth going for? Charles.
What bump in the road? That's a very interesting question based on my life experience. I would say the bump in the road was probably when I was 23 years old, and I was working at a gas station, and one of my patrons at the gas station's dad was a business person. He saw something in me and introduced me or had me interview with the head of a local insurance company in Cleveland, Ohio. And to this day, I can still remember that guy telling me, here's a box of 500 index cards, fill those out with names and come back. But the word got back to me from the father who had introduced me to the person, was that person that said, don't ever send another N-word to me to hire. We're talking 1972, Cleveland, Ohio. My immediate response was, when you tell me no, I'm going to find a way to make it work. And I went out and got involved with another insurance company at that point, was very successful with that insurance company, went on to own my own private property and casualty insurance agency. And at a later date, I happened to run into this guy at a bar in Cleveland. And I reminded him of what he had said to me years ago and bought him a drink and walked away as he tried to claim that he was a part of my success. Madam Table Topics person.
Thank you, Charles. You know, I'm sure you all know this story. I've heard of it. It's said that Thomas Edison failed nearly 1,000 times before he achieved success in developing the incandescent light bulb. Yet when asked, he stated he did not fail, but rather he found 900 other ways not to develop that light bulb. Rosabelle, this question for you, please. What guidance system may we apply in the process of going forward toward maximum achievement of what or who we are to become? Rosabelle.
Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster Ray Robles, for that great question. I think particularly being in science and medicine, one of the things I learned early on in my training was that trial and error by experimentation and scientific discovery is normal in the process of learning. And as I grew older and went into practice and continued to read the scientific journals, I've noticed that there is a reluctance for publication of negative studies. When a drug is tested, even if it didn't work, it seems that it's still published and it's still sent out to the public for use until somebody has a severe tragic demise, sometimes catastrophic, and in more than one person, and the lawyers get together and file a lawsuit. I think learning from mistakes is the single most important way to learn. After all, how else would you know what doesn't work, like Thomas Edison said? And I wish that science would move back into the era when we used to publish negative studies and failures, so that everybody else would know not to try those drugs or not to try that mechanism of action and not to try that surgical device that's going to cause reactions and side effects and complications. And with that, I think I still apply that in my reading and reviewing of medical journals, always with a little bit of, I guess I would say a little bit of salt, a grain of salt added to my understanding. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Robles.
Thank you, Rosabelle. I'm sure by now most of us have heard of Mel Robbins. She was an author, speaker, motivator, and a life coach. She used to be a lawyer working in a firm in Boston for 5 years and hated every moment of it until she decided to go back to school, studying psychology, neuroscience, before she finally quit that job. She also worked as a talk show host on Sirius XM and a major television news channel before she found her passion, helping others to find theirs. Taya, you're a life coach and see your client struggling with similar work circumstances, drinking because they're miserable and unhappy. What advice would you offer them? Taya.
Thank you for that question. So what advice would I offer to someone who is struggling? Generally, in the first session, I like to learn the person's backstory, if you will. This is what we call assessment. So I usually have the client kind of go back to their childhood, tell me the people they lived with, some of their experiences growing up, if they have experienced any type of traumatic events, as well as accomplishments. It is very important to allow a person in a beginning of building that relationship to share who they are. In that process, I then explore their hopes, their dreams, their goals, what it is that they want to do, what it is that they want to see themselves being better at. And so generally, my goal is to support them in finding their voice, in making connections maybe with their past and their strengths that maybe they had at that point in life, and then seeing how that can be applied in their present situation. What I have learned is that many clients have within them the ability to see their way forward. So oftentimes it's not so much advice, it's more about them hearing their own thoughts and their own feelings and taking that and allowing that to be their strength to propel them toward their goals. Thank you, Table Topics host, Ray.
Thank you, Taya. Mr. Toastmaster, do we have time for one more?
Yes, I think we have one more.
You heard it, folks. One more. In life, we must always strive to make use of obstacles and do our best to not allow them to keep us from becoming all that we are destined to become. Tell me, Daniel, without describing your own personal situation, unless you care to, of course, give an example of one life setback that, if used constructively and wisely, can lead to a very useful, productive outcome as an entrepreneur. Tell me, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Table Topics Master. One example that comes to mind is my lawn, my front lawn. When we moved to this house, the front lawn was a jungle. And I told the landlady that there was no way I could live here with that lawn. Could she do something about it? She said no, she could not. To make matters worse, there's no sprinkler system around here. because the water pressure was low. And so she had, one, there's no lawn. There's no way to water a lawn because there's no sprinkler. And she said, well, I pay for water. There's a hose. You may as well. If whatever you want to do, you're free to do it. And I took that as a challenge. One obstacle was the weather. It was the peak of some triple digits for multiple days. But I was determined to get a lawn. And so I gave myself 90 days. Before even starting, as soon as I thought, maybe I could, I'm willing to try. I gave myself 90 days and said, whatever happens within those 90 days, I am not going to stop. I'll keep going. Later, I met people whose grass seeds burned because of the heat. I had 3 rounds of grass seeds burn, but it was all within the 90 days, and I kept going. On day 74, there was a turf of green, and all the neighbors came out because by then it had become a neighborhood project. They wanted to see it succeed. And so we had a celebration. And 5 years later, the lawn is green. I recorded all the lessons from that experience, the 90 days. I had a journal every day keeping it. And whatever project I'm on now, I go back to the examples, the lessons that I learned during those 90 days. Back to you, Mr. Table Topics Master.
Thank you, Tomi. I cannot express the amount of gratitude in the ability to journal. I love journaling. I journal every single morning, except this morning, of course. With that in mind, I turn it over back, conduct the session back to our Toastmaster, Bon Wei.